We'll start in just a couple minutes, folks. Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for waiting. I think we'll go ahead and get started. We're not going to have a presentation today, but we have a few documents to go through. And I want to welcome everybody and ask you to please use the chat only for letting us know if you're having technical difficulties or sharing links. And for introducing yourself, if you could each just put in the chat your name and your affiliation, if you have one, and that will help us know who is whom. And also, as we go through the meeting, we'd ask you not to have a separate conversation in the chat, but if you have a comment to make, to raise your hand and make the comment, just like if we were in the same room with each other, because it's very hard to follow those two conversations at the same time and make sure everyone is heard. And if I'm sorry. So yeah, just please use the chat judiciously and participate in the conversation. Okay, so the purpose for today is to talk about how we're going to prioritize the criteria that we came up with in the last meeting for awarding grants to jurisdictions. And on the project website, Trisha, if you could just put that link in there. there are the materials for today, the agenda. There, under last meeting's notes, you'll see how we did the how we took the suggestions and put them together. It's in track changes, so it's kind of hard to read. But then there's the meeting materials for today that takes the results of all of that, and we're going to look through those and review them and move forward from there. Yes, Gianna.
I just wanted to ask if we could also give a quick note of the capability assessment being due today, because I know that there are a few people who have we've reached out to fill it out during the meetings. So
Okay, I think you just did that.
yeah, it will be done by we ask that you finish it up today. But if you need an extension of a day or two, please let us know as soon as possible. Thank you.
Okay, thank you.
We got the sound and I lost the picture. At least we got the sound. I think.
You lost the picture? You don't
Yeah.
see the video? Oh. Is anybody else having that trouble too? No? Okay. Sorry. So, um, so let's get started. Does anybody have any questions before we get started? No? Okay. So, Trisha, if you would pull up the prioritizing handout for today and make it as big as you can.
Is this the right one?
Um,
Or do you want,
Scroll down. I won't know until I see the second page.
oh,
This is the right
prioritizing
one.
criteria?
Yes, that's the right one. Okay.
Great. Okay.
So you can go to the second page. Okay, here we go. All right, so, we can't see the colors on your screen. Can you change it to a white background? Well, maybe we can. Can you tell the difference between yellow and white on this, folks? Okay.
I can change it. I just have my settings to be in dark mode. I'll change it.
Sorry, this is
Okay.
taking some of our time here. All right. Well, oh, there we go. Whew.
Better?
Yes, thank you. So now we can really tell what's yellow and what's not. So the yellow highlighted cells are the ones that are from the FEMA criteria, which are on the page before in case you need to look at them again. But those are the ones we started with, and then a number of them were just FEMA suggested. These are the FEMA required. And then what I did was I took the work that we did last time, I took all the notes and I tried to get them into the criteria the way that we discussed. And I turned all of them into questions. And then I tried to categorize them underneath the FEMA requirements. So that's what you're seeing here. So for example, deliver at least 40% of the funding to disadvantaged communities. That is not a question, but that's something that OEM is needing to do. So, so I added the question, is the jurisdiction one of those disadvantaged communities? And I just left that yellow. Then for HMGP and HMGP post-fire, is the jurisdiction one of the directly impacted jurisdictions identified in the disaster declaration? And then one of the ones that we added was the jurisdiction directly impacted, but not to the degree necessary for a presidential disaster declaration. Then another FEMA requirement is to what degree are the proposal's benefits maximized? And then we had asked to enter examples here. So for example, does the proposal address multiple hazards, leverage other funding, address other priorities such as green infrastructure or resilient energy sources at the same time? And under that, maximizing the proposal's benefits, I put, does this proposal take a regional or holistic approach to mitigation actions rather than a site-specific approach? Would this proposal remove people, structures, critical facilities, or lifelines from a hazard area rather than mitigating within the hazard area? So for example, would you take a repetitively flooded building out of the floodplain, or would you leave it where it is but elevate it, which is maybe effective, but the most effective way to mitigate would be to remove the building from the floodplain. And does the proposal protect historical or current salmonid habitat in areas other than where repetitive and severe repetitive losses have occurred? That the partner to that to number 8 is underneath another section. I think it might be the resiliency one. To what degree is the proposal anticipated to increase resiliency? And can you scroll a little bit? Okay, so the next yellow one at 16 is to what degree is the proposal anticipated to reduce risk? So the next ones have been, the next white ones have been divided under those two. Is it more to increase resiliency or is it more to reduce risk? So one of our proposals was, does the proposal prioritize including mitigation measures such as defensible space, engineering for increased snow load or wind speeds, adopting higher standards for floodplain management, etc., in anticipation of future natural hazard events? Is the proposal for a buyout or several in a region or regions with repetitive and severe repetitive losses where critical historical and current salmonid habitats are present? Would this proposal remove people, structures, critical facilities, or lifelines from a hazard area? Did I put that in twice? It looks like I may have. Does this proposal include communicating its benefits to the community? Does the proposal consider pre-planning for transitional housing that will be needed after a disaster? For planning proposals, does this proposal include integrating the NHMP with the jurisdictions or tribes' comprehensive plan? And then the next FEMA one, to what degree is the proposal anticipated to reduce risk? For example, reduce vulnerability to structures, critical facilities, lifelines, socially vulnerable populations. And then is the proposal for a community at the highest risk with the highest vulnerability, including underserved cultures and communities and socially vulnerable populations. Consider non-monetary benefits of the proposal, such as physical, mental, social health and well-being, history of underserved communities, sacred sites, indigenous natural resource management practices, and indigenous natural resource management practices include but are not limited to prescribed fire, first foods, and other intrinsic values. Is the proposal to mitigate a high-risk property, including repetitive loss and severe repetitive loss structures? Is the proposal for a buyout in a region with a repetitive with repetitive and severe repetitive losses where critical historical and current unwanted habitats are present. Yeah, and then the other one up under resilience was, is it in a it's the same question without needing to be in an area with repetitive or severe repetitive loss. Would the proposal have the effect of encouraging new development in hazardous areas? Is the proposal in an area under intense development pressure?
Mhm.
Then for mitigation planning grants, at which stage is the jurisdictions or tribes NHMP in its 5-year life cycle? Has it never been developed? Is it expired? Is it expiring soon? Is it expiring later? And is it currently being updated? And to what extent is the proposal link climate change adaptation, whether that's state, local, or tribal, to the risk identified through the state risk assessment and the local or tribal risk assessment? And
Mhm.
under those, we moved, given that all of Oregon will experience increasingly severe impacts from climate change, although in different ways, is the proposal in an area that's anticipated to experience such impacts on a greater scale than other areas? And would the proposal have the effect of encouraging new development in an area anticipated to experience impacts of climate change on that greater scale than other areas? So, that was my attempt at organizing these. And I'm Trisha is prepared to take comments on this.
So
She,
I have just like
yeah,
a clarifying / a
sure.
question is, so the yellow here is what is required by FEMA in their FEMA planning guidance for how you put together an NHMP. We need to address all of these
Yellow,
um,
yes.
prompts. And then what's not highlighted, what's in white, is what the planning group um, came up with, was
Last week.
generated in these planning meetings. They
Hmm.
came up with all of these. These are brilliant. These are really, really good questions.
Hmm. Yeah, I
Wow.
think there were just a couple that we brought from our pre-planning
Okay. Yeah.
sessions, and the rest
I
of
missed
them were
Friday's
from
meeting. I
last
was
week.
out of town, but these are really, really great questions.
So this was my attempt at organizing them, and I'd like to get some feedback on this.
Okay. Okay. In your feedback, are there specific questions that you're looking for in your feedback? Like,
Well, I would think that that people who help do this and others would have comments maybe on how the questions are worded, if I captured what they were actually trying to say,
mhm.
um, if there's something they don't like, if they have additional suggestions. One of my questions is, do we want to keep all 25 of them? Um,
Okay. And okay, another clarifying, sorry, is so this document uh work not it's not necessarily a worksheet, but this in its entirety will be included in the NHMP. And the purpose of this is it's an additional resource to supporting OEM's decision-making process when they are dispersing grants, but it's not a policy-making process. This is a suggestion. These are additional questions that they could ask
well,
uh, individual grants as they come in,
it is
just to
questions they could
clarify.
ask of individual grants as they come in, but it is sort of a touchstone. So in that way, it's a policy. It's a overall um um articulation um of our collective priorities
Yeah.
for
So one good piece of feedback
providing
might
money to
be,
jurisdictions for grants, right?
okay,
So yes, this is something that is supposed to guide OEMs choices, but along with the criteria that are required from each grant offering. And some of those are in here. For example, for HMGP and HMGP post-fire, OEM has to give first priority to those jurisdictions that were affected in the declaration and the disaster declaration. They can't not do that. And that's in here. But in addition to that, then where do they go from there? And so this would be something they could rely on as a guide to making those sorts of decisions. And for the non-disaster grants, there are already generally scoring matrices in those grants. So in addition to whatever those grants are requiring, this is another guide for, okay, so these, 3 of these 49 projects or 20 of these 49 projects came up with the same score or very close in scores. How do we prioritize them? And this can help in the big picture. So that's how this is to be used. It's not just an exercise for the sake of exercise. It is supposed to be used. Hey, Nancy, do you want to say something?
Yeah, so I have a question and it's not obvious to me, so maybe
Mhm.
I'm just misreading it. Is our goal to be proactive and not reactive? And is our goal to somehow focus folks to go in a certain direction? Because this could cover the entire gamut if people wanted it to. They, in some cases, folks might be focusing just on disadvantaged communities. It wouldn't necessarily address the other things. Or some might just focus on green infrastructure. Are the proposals supposed to meet all of these?
No, not necessarily. Not every proposal will or could. And there's a difference between planning proposals and on the ground, physical project proposals. Proposals that you get after a disaster might look a little different than the ones that you get in between disasters. So, no, they aren't all going to meet all of these. But for the purposes of us putting together a set of prioritized criteria that could be used to award these grants to jurisdictions, they do cover the whole universe, or they could cover the whole universe. Just, and then OEM can use them in conjunction with the individual offerings requirements to differentiate between projects and plans and decide how to prioritize the applications that they do get. Did I answer your question?
It does, but let me provide some context. So at one point, I was going to provide input on brick grants, and there wasn't any green component to it at all. So is this now going to be an approach that brick is expected to use?
No, it's
Mm.
it's not necessarily an expectation, but FEMA is becoming much more open to those kinds of projects. And FEMA is also becoming much more cognizant of building codes and things like that. So their priorities are shifting somewhat, and they're becoming more open to looking at environmental benefits. So it doesn't mean that a project has to have that, but if it does, it's it could be raised up in the list.
Okay. And then another question, if something's way down in the 20s, is that considered less important than the ones up above?
No, these are in no priority order at all.
Okay.
Not
Right.
at all. But that's what we're going to work on today.
Okay, thank you.
Sure. Bill.
Hello. Yeah, I
Hi.
guess my question is kind of similar to Nancy's, except it's more, you know, from a selfish point of view. So I apply for many of these grants, and you know, as an applicant, I would want to know which one of these are scoring my grants. I would want to know that like up front as I'm filling out that application. I would not want it to be used somewhere in some back room where someone's deciding, oh, we're going to use this to score it or that to score it. That's unfair. So do you know like how this would be used? Like, would they put this in the request for proposals so that it's very clear and transparent to all of us applying, like how we're getting scored?
That's a great question, Bill. Because as far as I know, it's not happening this way now. When we actually did speak to the person in charge of mitigation planning at FEMA headquarters and one of her senior planners about this. And what we were told is, you know, we felt like, at least for HMGP, the buck might stop with the state hazard mitigation officer. And they said, well, you know, and if that's the case, then why are we doing this exercise? And they said, no, 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 we have to do this. This is the planning element. They want the big picture analysis of what the priorities are, but they also gave us the caveat that it has to be used in conjunction with whatever the actual BRIC or HMA requirements are for that particular offering. So it's fuzzy. It's not that clear. And if OEM is to use it as a touchstone, it may not rise to the level of you have to have this in your application. We're scoring based on it. It may be that it would need to be daylighted in OEM's communications with applicants or sub-applicants, that in addition to what you see in this BRIC qualitative and technical scoring sheet, we are also, you know, in the event that it's not clear, we are also going to use these to help us make the decisions of which ones are prioritized. I don't know if that helps. Christina?
Yeah, just you had asked for feedback. I'm changing the subject slightly, but generally this does a good job, I think, of representing the conversation that we had last week. One thing that I notice is a bit of a theme now that I'm seeing everything put together is we're definitely using a lot of language, understandably, that reflects the flood world, severe and repetitive, losses, for example. And I
Mhm.
wonder if there's a way to maybe generalize that just a little bit because there are lots of hazards, tsunamis, for example, that are not going to have severe and repetitive loss associated with them because we haven't had that type of event, but we know it's coming. Um, Maybe there's a slightly more flexible phrasing in there that allows for other types of high risk properties to be prioritized. Um, does that make sense?
It does make sense. The reason that it's specific about repetitive and severe repetitive loss properties is because um, we need to have those in there. Let's see, we needed to have the severe and repetitive loss properties in for the goals. The one in here about the salmonid habitat, that was a FEMA suggested one because of the biop.
Mm-hmm.
And that was actually suggested in an official letter to OEM. And that's where that came from. And then out of our conversation last week was, well, why not protect the salmonid species outside of areas that have severe and repetitive and severe repetitive loss properties. So that's why that's there. I don't have a problem with generalizing it to allow for other types of hazards as well, and we can talk as a group about that. What does everybody else think? Comments?
Or suggestions for other phrases, because I don't have anything off the top of my head, given I am more of a flood person, but what else do other folks use when they're talking about other types of hazards?
Murph?
Hi, Marion. Thank you very much. I'm along with Tricia. That excellent job on this. You did a very good job organizing this.
Thank you.
I think with the changes that are coming to planning in local areas, governor ordered to increase our housing needs. These types of changes need to be very straightforward, I think, because there's going to be areas that are going to be built in that are going to be subject to climate change, natural hazards that we're going to see when we, start reducing the setbacks to wetlands and to our rivers. We need to really keep in mind that we have to be ready to move these homes if we have chosen areas in zoning that are now in high danger. And also with Bill's comment, I think emphasis on culture is most important, something that we talked about in our last meeting. I'll stop there.
Okay. Anybody else? All right.
This is Hannah from Odo.
Oh, hi. Thank you.
Yeah. Hi, yeah, I am just seeing this list, so apologies because I'm not as familiar.
Mhm.
Thinking from the energy perspective, I see some questions related to resiliency, but I wonder if a question specifically, like, does this project or proposal address energy resiliency? If that might be an addition.
Okay.
Yeah, do we have anything on there? I know that
Do
FEMA planning guidance does.
there was up toward the top, Trisha, I think there was an example. Yeah, number 5. To what degree are the proposal's benefits maximized? For example, resilient energy sources, but we don't have one specifically about energy resilience. So what could you on the right now on the hot seat, kind of draft a sentence that you would get at what you are looking for?
Yeah, it's interesting to think about that because I feel like it would have to stay pretty high level and broad since energy resilience can take a lot of forms. It can be grid resilience with electricity infrastructure. If the local government's partnering with like a utility partner, it can be backup fuel storage and diversification. It can be a microgrid, solar power batteries. So I guess it would just be is part of the work that's being proposed or the planning that's being proposed, considering increasing energy resilience of critical public service facilities, I think would be a great place to start. Thinking of hospitals, law enforcement, community resilience centers. That's really at the heart of community energy resilience. And I think that would be a for sure a plus if that was a piece of a project that was being proposed. I think from most of our perspectives. So I don't know if that's still too broad, but my colleague Tracy.
No, I think that's great.
Oh, okay, great. I was gonna say
And I
Tracy
took some
might have
notes.
another perspective.
I think that's really great.
Was Tracy here? She's saying something?
Yeah, Tracy is here. I don't know if she has anything to add, but I just wanted to give her that space if she does.
Okay.
No, I don't have anything to add. That was great. I would agree with everything Hannah said, and if we can help with any wordsmithing, just let us know.
Okay. Why don't you take a look now and see if what we've got captures what you're trying to say? And if not, maybe you can put something in the chat or send us an email. Okay.
Sounds
Gerald?
Yes, thank you. Just comment on that. This would be pre-disaster mitigation, wouldn't it? Something that we should be working on.
Is this, I think the question is, so is your question, what I'm hearing is this is aimed at pre-disaster mitigation projects? And the answer is yes. Yeah, this would be proactive resiliency.
Exactly. Okay. Thank you.
Okay. Any other comments? Are we missing anything else? Reed? Hi.
Yeah, thanks. I wanted to follow up on Christina's comment or question about the severe and repetitive loss language, and just
Mm.
wondered if saying high, sort of generalizing those things to high risk, including repetitive loss, et cetera, sort of like what Nancy wrote in the chat, if that kind of takes care of that issue, because it seems like the severe repetitive loss is a reasonable definition of a type of high risk property, but there's other things like Christina noted, that tsunamis that are high risk under a kind of different mode of probability. So events that are lower probability but more consequential damage, could be considered alongside these more frequent, less impactful events.
Mm-hmm.
So if I was to summarize what you said, it would be, maybe a suggestion to include language that's more inclusive of low probability, high impact events, not just repetitive and severe repetitive events.
Yeah, I think that makes sense to me. And I don't know if it needs to be specifically laid out as an option, or if it just is more generally high risk, and then there's some flexibility in how you determine what fits that, but it wouldn't be limited to only these repetitive loss sorts of cases.
Okay.
What?
What? I'm sorry.
Oh, maybe Christina has another follow-up on that.
Oh, just a little bit. Sorry, Deanna, to jump the line here for a second. I'm seeing in, I think it's criteria 18, you said a high risk property, comma, including repetitive loss, severe repetitive loss. We could probably use that same language in the other ones, which I think are 8 and 11. Is that correct? Where it just jumps straight to repetitive loss. Instead, we could be saying, does the proposal protect historical or current salmon habitat in high risk areas, including repetitive and severe repetitive loss? Maybe just to be inclusive on all those other ones as well.
Okay.
Thanks.
I'm noticing that there are some questions in the chat, and really we're not going to be following the chat that closely. So please speak up, put your hand up. Let's make sure that we get everybody's voices into the arena here.
Oh,
I
yeah.
I have a stupid question, and maybe
Okay.
this is really obvious to people. We're talking a lot about repetitive loss. One of the things that I have trouble with my proposals, because the Corps of Engineers requires repetitive loss to be part of one of our proposals to headquarters. I don't get that data. I don't know what repetitive loss is. I mean, like I've reached out to FEMA to try to get that data set, and it's like I gotta sign my house away to get it, and it changes every year. And so I just kind of abandoned the idea of getting that data to help me with my proposals. So I mean, I don't know. The only thing I would say to that is if we're putting criteria in here that represents a barrier for people proposing, then it could be an issue.
Uh-huh.
Do we have Chris
same-
or Deanna on the line?
Yeah, I'm here, guys. Deanna. So for repetitive loss, severe repetitive loss, FEMA requires a ISAA agreement for the agency to sign over their house and life and all that.
It's
It's
pretty significant.
protected, it's publicly protected information if it contains addresses or names of property owners that would need to be held within that agency and not publicly shared. So that's why FEMA requires the ISAA agreement. It's the agency taking on that liability, right? So we don't have that at DLCD for ISAA for repetitive loss, severe repetitive loss, but we do have ability to obtain summary data for repetitive loss and severe repetitive loss, which will say, like, example, 40 properties in Columbia County are repetitive or severe repetitive loss. It won't give the addresses nor the property owner's name. So in order for that to be like enacted or like a deliverable to know if that's a specific repetitive loss, the agency would have to request that specifically with FEMA and go directly to them to request the data. And then they'd have to come up with the process to house that data. So if they say they request it and then they map it, that map would have to be protected information because it's not really public. So that's a consideration for that agency that's going to request the data.
Can I jump in here for a second?
Mhm.
I think that OEM actually does have that agreement, an ISAA agreement. I don't think they can share the data outside of OEM, but I believe they have it. So that if they need it for doing this process, I think it's available.
Yeah, I agree. It should go hand in hand. The data should be available to exercise that priority.
So I hope that's the answer to your question, Paul.
Yeah.
Anna?
I was gonna ask a question.
Hmm?
I put up in a comment earlier, should some of the priorities consist of a connection to the new risk assessment? So if you scroll up, Trisha, a little bit maybe to page 1. So page 1, item 1, for example, in my mind, I'm thinking deliver at least 40% of the funding to disadvantaged communities as indicated in the risk assessment. That's an idea or a suggestion to point and make that connection. Like, where are we getting the data from? The
Okay.
same would go true for like item number 20 as just an example on how I'm kind of trying to voice this suggestion.
Okay. So Deanna, for number 1, disadvantaged communities are defined by that EDRC and CDRZ. Those are the definitions of disadvantaged communities. It has nothing to do with the risk assessment.
Okay, well, I'm just trying to give examples.
Look at 20 when we can.
Oh. We'll go.
Like
We can
20
add
is,
20.
would the proposal have the effect of encouraging new development in a hazardous area as indicated in the risk assessment?
Okay, well, there is a tie to the risk assessment in here. Let me find it.
But I didn't want to hem us in too much because another agency might have data availability to a different mapping or a different geospatial database. You know what I mean? Like, I don't want to sell us short here.
Okay, it's in 23, which talks about linking the climate change adaptation to the risk assessment. And I think there's more.
Yeah, you're right. I see it in number 22, 23.
It's really about climate change adaptation. Um,
Yeah, but if folks think this is a bad idea, then now's the time to speak up.
Is
Well,
someone with the
I'll
risk
jump-
assessment team here that could help us understand what that might do or not do? Like
Say it again,
how spatially accurate is it?
say that again.
Is someone here with the risk assessment team that can help us make this decision about whether we should include that or not? Like, is it spatial data that we can actually make that determination with? I didn't think so, but
That's a
maybe.
great question, Bill. And my gut says you don't put the tool in the rule. And so I wouldn't want to call out the risk assessment tool that we've developed over the last year specifically because it could change. It could become outdated if we don't find maintenance funds for it. But to get to your question of, is the tool spatially explicit enough that we could make that determination? I don't know. Our scale is at the census tract, and we can parse that out to analyze cities within those census tracts, but I don't know if we can get down to the individual parcel level.
Mhm.
Yeah, I had a
New
related-
development in hazardous area. I mean,
So we map hazard areas. We're continuing to map hazard areas.
I think that this is a more complicated question than what the risk assessment answers.
Mhm.
This to me has to do with changes in land use assessment, which is something that FEMA requires us to analyze. And I think the risk assessment could be one source of information for sure, but it's not the only source of information.
Trisha or Marion, on a related question, could you remind us or refresh some of us? I haven't been in a meeting since the meeting on the risk assessments in the start of October. So I'm a little unclear on how those are going to be used in terms of prioritization. And so I think I chimed in with Deanna's question, and I guess for me, how we include the risk assessment within these prioritization questions also depends on just how y'all are imagining the risk assessment is being used for any other part of the prioritization process. Like if it's already going to be used as a prioritization tool, and then this is like another layer, I think that kind of presents a different option or path.
It will be, that's a great question. It will be used as a tool in other prioritization processes, yes. It's been used to inform the goals. It is meant to be woven throughout the NHMP. So to be clear, I don't think there's anything wrong with using the risk assessment to inform our thinking on some of these criteria, but it shouldn't be the only tool. And I don't, and more experienced planners, please do chime in if I'm not on the right thinking here, but I wouldn't want to preclude any other tools that we could use to evaluate, for example, in this question, whether a proposal has the effect of encouraging new development in a hazardous area. If we cut ourselves off to only using the risk assessment to make that judgment, and we ignore other tools that we may have, if that seems right.
Okay. Does that answer your question?
I think so. I mean, it not necessarily, I don't understand exactly all the ways it will be interwoven and used to prioritize prior to this, but I do get that. And I think especially getting the part that Trisha said about not limiting ourselves here for data sources makes a lot of sense to me.
Okay. So in the chat, unfortunately, Annie Williams Davis Boyd has lost her mic connection. So she is asking about wildfires and how do we prepare for potential for resiliency to both fires and flooding.
I think that's a really relevant question for the entire NHMP, and it's something that we are asking in the risk assessment methodology and the tool that we've developed to have that inter-hazard comparability. I think that's a really salient question. For this purpose, we're looking at criteria that has been suggested and that's been required by FEMA that describes how to prioritize jurisdictions to receive planning and project grants that are available under federal and non-federal programs. So it's a little bit outside of scope, but is at the same time the exact question that we're trying to answer within the entirety of the plan and within the risk assessment. So I don't know if that gives you some context. And maybe another interpretation of your question that I think is really smart is adding in a criteria that speaks to multi-hazard resilience. I think that maybe, now that I've talked through it, that might be what your question was really asking is, does this project, maybe the suggestion is, does this project address multi-hazard resiliency? And in the chat, since your mic isn't on, does that sound right?
I think that goes back to Christina's initial comment about allowing for other types of hazards and broadening the language so that we talk about other types of hazards as well as just flooding or severe repetitive and severe repetitive losses.
I guess I would agree with that. Yes, it's definitely both making sure our language is inclusive of lots of different hazards, but I also think criteria 5 does explicitly call out, does the proposal address multiple hazards? I know that was something we talked about last week, so I know it's a little bit in there, and multiple benefits was definitely another thing we'd talked about last week of, can we, reduce risk and improve the environment or otherwise. So that might sort of be covered, but
Annie, if you're still here, can you advise us in the chat if we're getting to your question here? Let's see. Yes, that was your thought. Okay. Very good.
Multiple hazards. I think it's important as well to include some language around climate change, that it's multi-hazard and also how climate change affects hazards.
Okay, are we getting this down somewhere?
I took it, yeah, I'm going to take this note in multiple places. I have it down at the bottom.
Okay, Annie agrees with the climate change too.
Yeah.
Okay.
Multi-hazard resiliency, including climate change. Does
Okay.
this project address multiple benefits?
Okay, great. So we're kind of getting, we're spending, I think, more time on this than I anticipated. So can we have some feedback now on whether we'd like to keep all these 25 plus the ones that we're coming up with now? So we'd have about 30 criteria to organize and prioritize here. Okay, and Bill, I just wanted to go back to your question about process and transparency, and that is something that we'd have to take up with OEM, and ask them to address when they come up with the process for using these. Mark?
12 and number 7 are repeats.
Oh, thank you.
Yes.
12 and 7. Okay, so which one does it belong under?
No, they're just repeats.
Right, but they're organized repeats. So if you take it out of one, you want to leave it in the other.
Oh,
So I would say maybe it
Go to the
doesn't.
next question.
So 12 says, would this proposal remove people, structures, critical facilities, or lifelines from a hazard area rather than mitigating within the hazard area? And is that related to increasing resiliency or maximizing benefits? It's kind of both. And maybe simply because in a very superficial way, we have more criteria under 9 than under 5. We leave it as number 7 and take it out as number 12. What do folks think?
That seems reasonable to me. While we're on the topic, it looks like 11 and 19 are the same as well.
Okay. Maybe I didn't do the greatest job here. I thought I got them all.
No, you did a great job, Marion.
wait, I'm sorry, Marion. I was not paying attention for a minute. There are less under number 5 than there are under number 9. So you want me to remove the one that's under
Yeah,
number
remember
9?
number 12.
Remove
And
that.
then
Sorry. And then Christina, you said that number 7.
This 11 and 19 appear
11.
to me to be the same.
Okay. So what do we think? What one do we want?
11 and which one?
19.
19.
Yeah, I would say removing 19 would be better. So it doesn't really seem to be as risk related.
Done.
Okay.
Others? Oops. This one is really interesting to me. And I wonder what folks think about but it's pre-planning, but it's not just transitional housing that will be needed after a disaster, but is rebuilding, is having a zoning code that is not just friendly, but is capable of rebuilding. I think of the example of fires down in Phoenix and Talent, even big fires in places like Paradise, California. where home types that were burned were not approved land uses in the current zoning code. And so they could not rebuild what had been there before. And in a few cases, in quite a few cases, that meant a loss of affordable housing, affordable, like lowercase a affordable housing, and a loss of the people who had lived there before, that they couldn't afford to rebuild what was required. And so when I think of pre-planning for post-disaster, it's not just transitional housing. Like, are we allowed to put pop-up housing on the baseball field? But what does, our public facilities planning look like? Do we have enough like infrastructure capacity to rebuild at the level, the zoned
Right.
capacity there?
Right,
And how do we rebuild, and not even how do we rebuild what we had before, but how do we rebuild something that's more resilient, that maybe supports walkability, that supports like community cohesion, that is more environmentally friendly post-disaster?
Yeah, we call that shadow planning, planning in advance also in
Oh,
the
that's
planning world. And yeah, the comment last meeting was specifically about transitional housing, but I agree with you, it's a much bigger question. Nancy and then Marv.
A little more discussion on taking out the critical habitat from the risk. The way I view it is that if you have green approaches, including protecting or buyouts, that's actually decreasing the risk, not necessarily dealing with resiliency. I mean,
What
if
number
we
was
want to
that,
be
Nancy, again?
proactive, I think we need to be addressing reducing risk.
What number? You said green infrastructure. What number was that again?
There isn't one that I see that's related to green infrastructure. I see the only thing is this one for, buyout. I think we should also be including green infrastructure stuff as well.
Yeah,
I
we
do remember
included,
seeing green infrastructure on here. It is
sorry, it's a number 5 as an example for to what degree are the proposals benefits maximized.
Okay, cool.
It's just an example. And so it's, your point is well taken, Nancy.
My there was that last discussion on Phoenix and pre-planning and shadow planning. Well, finish what you're doing, Marianne. I don't want to interrupt.
I think it was what Nancy was doing. I don't think Nancy was finished.
Oh, I can't tell who's typing.
So from my standpoint, I would rather keep number 12 since, well, I would rather that where did it go? I pulled down my own. Is the proposal for buyout with repetitive and severe repetitive losses for critical, historical, and so on. I think that's related more to risk than increasing resiliency. That's my opinion. I don't know. You guys struck it out the other way.
Oh, okay. Okay, and who is the person who suggested that we keep it under number 9?
I don't know. It was a gentleman. I don't know who it was talking.
Yeah, I don't remember either.
Yeah, hi, sorry, that's me, Reed, who jumped in on that. Yeah, I guess, missed the connection between salmonid habitat and risk. Specifically, it seemed to be more of a kind of related benefit or resilience sort of issue, but I don't feel strongly about that. So if someone else has a more clear logic, that's great.
Okay. So, being that Nancy's our ODFW person, maybe we will follow her. Um, her feelings about this.
I wonder as well if this has anything, if there's any connection here about the FEMA buyout and any connection to like what is good for salmonid, is it salmonid habitats and flood mitigation? That if we're not building in areas that are critical for salmonid habitat, then that means that we're also not building in flood zones.
Yeah, so this was FEMA's suggestion in that letter to OEM. And specifically, I think that if I can remember the exact language, it was that um, they wanted to prioritize buyouts in regions with repetitive and severe repetitive losses where critical salmonid habitats are present. We added historical and current. We wanted to include historical salmonid habitats in that. And so I clarified it to mean that, to say that it's historical and current. And then I turned it into a question. So is the proposal for a buyout in a region with severe repetitive losses? So that's where that came from. It is a FEMA thing. And if Nancy feels that it's better under number 5 than under number 9, and Reed is not objecting, I'm fine with that too. Is this something that you wanted to comment on, Murph, or do you have something else?
You know me, I can comment on all of them, but starters would be back on transitional housing.
Okay.
I suggested that in our last was a meeting I had with that Darby Ayers flood, the mayor of Talent, Oregon, had brought up one of the major hurdles that they had to overcome after their fire had swept through and took so many residents, that they had received the FEMA trailers and they had no place to put them. Zoning would not allow it. They had no infrastructure in place. They had to jump through many hurdles and people had to stay in shelters for months, even though there was transitional housing available. So this was a suggestion that I brought up, that this could be something that's pre-planned.
Yes, yes. I think it's a very good suggestion and it is something we should be looking at.
As far as salmonoid habitat increasing resiliency, we have proven it up in the Sandy River watershed by levee removal and access to flood. And that has relieved, considerable amount of energy from a very forceful river during high water events. So this has also opened up gravel beds to salmon, which they immediately accessed when the levees were removed.
Okay. Annie has another comment in the chat because she doesn't have a mic. She says a lot of areas will financially be severely disadvantaged, and how do small rural communities address this disparity to make this transition, as many older small communities are actually substandard housing before the buyout or disaster mitigation?
I don't see that. I'm sorry. Oh, wait. Okay, I see that now. It's a reply.
How do small rural communities address the disparity to make the transition? Actually, okay. So,
Yeah, it's a complicated question, I think, and it touches on managed retreat. It touches on, that urban rural divide. It's a great question. I think it might again be beyond scope, but it's right on tack.
Yeah, don't really have a good answer for that. Okay, it's time check. It's almost 2:15 and we don't have much time to actually get to prioritizing. This has been a great conversation and um we've refined this list. I wonder if there are any other burning questions or comments out there before we move on to actually talking about prioritizing this list. Five, four, going twice, going once. Okay. All right. So we'll go to the next page. Thank you. So there, I've done a little bit of poking around on prioritizing methods, and many of them really are not well suited to this type of content. So I've come up with a couple things. And then on the next page, number 3 says, any others? So I'm open to suggestions here. This is really a very open discussion. There's this one method called RICE. Some of you may be familiar with. It means reach, impact, confidence, and effort. And I think that the concept might work for us, but we'd have to change what reach is, what the words we are using are. So this is reach times impact times confidence, and it should say divided by effort, but the line didn't come through when it converted to PDF. So it's reach times impact times confidence divided by effort. Reach means how many people does the action affect. Impact is how greatly are those people affected. Confidence is how sure are we that the action will succeed and achieve the estimated reach and impact. And the effort is how much effort will it take to accomplish the proposal. So none of those are necessarily the questions we would want to ask with this group of criteria, but we could use that concept to prioritize. And basically you score each one and then you do the arithmetic, and the one with the higher score is the higher priority. Another way of looking at this is that we could, can you go down a little bit to the end of the page so we can see all of number 2? Okay, and number 2 is actually number 2 and number 3 together, but number 2 is basically that we prioritize this in multiple different ways. So we've talked about the fact that we have planning proposals and physical project proposals. We've talked about that some of these criteria apply to grants that are for post-disaster events, and others apply to grants that are for well, we call it pre-disaster, but it's non-disaster. It's basically they come out once a year, whether there's been a disaster or not, you can still apply for the money to do the mitigation work that you want to do. And then some of them apply to all of them. So this was from an earlier, our original very short list before we made this new long list. And just thinking about how this might work out. And so across the top, we have planning and projects. Those are the 2 columns. And then down, and then across the rows, we have the disasters and the non-disasters. So the top left corner is planning projects post-disaster. And CNCB means capability and community building. Those are also in the same funding bucket with mitigation planning. So, so we have in the top left again, the post-disaster environment for planning projects or capability and capacity building projects. And in the top right corner, we have the post-disaster physical projects. And in the boxes there would be the criteria that apply to each one of those. And the same for the bottom row is the non-disaster grants for planning and capability and capacity building. And on the lower right is non-disaster for physical projects. And so we could say OEM, well, depends on what your project is. If it fits into one of these 4 buckets, then you use the prioritization that we came up with for those situations. So that's another possibility. And then number 3 really is the Promethi that I have with a question mark. It's the same multi-criteria decision making method that where multi-criteria, God, I can't speak. Multi-criteria decision analysis method, is that right, Trisha? That we're using for the risk assessment. And it's built for just this sort of thing. So those are 3 suggestions. And then I'm open to anything else, that all of you people who have lots of experience and are very smart and talented have to offer.
Well, I don't know if it's worth much. This is Hannah again, but I like the reach. The reach one seems there's something intuitively appealing about it. If we could group those criteria questions under those categories in some way. Marion, you were saying maybe those aren't the correct categories for this. When you were describing that, though, it made some sense to me. It just seems like aligning. If the intention is to also use those questions, then it would be maybe an effort to align the questions into those categories to allow for simpler scoring.
Yeah, that would take a little bit more. I haven't actually gotten to how would we change those questions to make it fit our group of criteria. But it was kind of an interesting thought. I don't know. Bill, Christina, Rhiannon.
We're listening. Just my reaction is just simply, it seems a little overwhelming. You've given us some different options here, and I don't have a good insight. Is there a simple way we can get through this?
Yeah, I mean, I'm looking for some of your creativity here, and the scientists in particular, you and Bill and Rhiannon, and I'm not sure of everybody else's areas and expertise, Paul, that you might have
So,
some ideas about how to do this or other experience. Okay, Rhiannon, thanks.
Yeah, I like the idea of using Promethi because it is used in the risk assessment upgrade, and so there's some consistency there between the two. If we're already tying them in, it would make sense to me to use similar or the same methods.
Okay. What do you all think about the more complicated one with the 4 different situations that these applications might fall into? Guess nobody likes that idea.
Can you say the question again? You were like the 4 different.
This multiple prioritization. So we have 4 buckets or 4
Okay.
situations that applications would fall into. They'd either be pre or post disaster, they'd either be planning or project grants. And so if you assign the criteria to the 25 or so criteria that we have to those buckets, because they will differ a little bit. Some of those really only apply to projects, and some of them really only apply to planning. And so if we were to, and some of them, they're the one about declared counties or declared jurisdictions. That one is only after disaster, HMGP. So if we divided them among those, there's another way to do this too. We could take the ones that apply to everything and prioritize those, and then take the pieces that are different for those situations and prioritize them for those situations. So, that would be a 5th category here there would be pre and post disaster planning and projects, and then there would be the ones that apply to everything. So, and most of them would apply to everything. Marv.
Okay, simple mind. Is there a way to simplify these buckets, their titles? I don't speak acronyms, so I have
I'm sorry. Yes. So, the top left corner is post-disaster.
Right.
And planning. And you don't really have to worry about the CNCB part. That's just other types of non-physical project applications. So it would be anything from, say, updating an NHMP or creating an NHMP to developing a public-private partnership that would lead to affecting hazard mitigation, effecting hazard mitigation. It could be some training to build capacity in a local government to actually get, have the ability to get an application done and handle an award, that sort of thing.
Right.
Okay, Paul?
So this is for applications for grants. I guess would it be OEM that is going through this process of prioritization? Is that who the actual executing agency would
Yes.
be?
Yes,
Okay.
so each grant, whether it's a non-disaster grant or a post-disaster grant, comes with its own set of criteria.
Mhm.
And then these are like the overall criteria for that can apply to those applications. So the first thing OEM has to do is apply the criteria in the NOFO, or the Notice of Funding Opportunity. And so, for example, the BRIC opportunity, Building Resilience in Communities, that one has both technical scoring and qualitative scoring. And that has to be used because that's part of the offering. But beyond that, and that may be very clear with the group of applications that come in, or it may be very fuzzy. They all may be rising to the top together. And so this is another set of criteria that OEM would then come to. It would be like a touchstone. Okay, are we prioritizing this correctly. If we have a few that were, they're very close and we don't know quite how to prioritize them, then they look at these criteria and they use them to help.
And so that would be that would be the schmo.
Yes.
So I mean, I guess my gut feel, and I'm just like responding. I'm totally ignorant on this, but like, what I just saw was a lot of criteria, and I know that in my past experience with the schmoes is that they are trying to do this very, very, very quickly. And I'm wondering, like, I mean, I could give you my opinion, but I wonder what their opinion is of having this criteria be what we're showing. Like, I wonder if like that would be more useful to get their input on how implementable this is.
It would be. Unfortunately, none of them are here today. And we could do that. In the end, they're basically going to be guidance for OEM. And so they could, I don't know how they would apply them exactly. But, that still needs to be worked out. And I get your point about there being a lot of them, which is one reason I asked, did we want to keep them all? But I think they're all good and nobody wanted to let any go. So we need to figure out now how we're going to prioritize them.
Okay, so I'll throw an idea out there. I don't
All
know.
right.
I was
Go.
gonna say I'm trying to help you, Marion. I don't have any good answers. But so if it sounds like maybe 2/3 of the criteria we just talked about apply to all of them. We certainly could either rank all of those. You could send out a poll and have us all rank all of them and put the shared criteria at least on a list together. Or you could have us give them a score of 1, 2, or 3 and have them, for 5 points, 10 points, or 15 points or something like that, so that at least those criteria can easily be integrated into some any sort of form that the schmo wants at that point. And then you would have maybe 4 for each of these different categories that's actually unique. I don't quite know how you'd want to integrate those. But again, maybe it's another voting, ranking, point system. Any of those could work. Also, Paul, I think we can see you doing laundry, by the way, just saying. Although his audio is now disconnected. Okay. All right. Sorry, Paul.
Okay. Yeah, thank you for that. That's a good idea. The other thing that came up was that it's possible that we could set it up so that OEM could use Promethi. I mean, Trish and I were talking about that just before this meeting.
Yeah. So the steps to use our ranking method, Promethi, which is a preference ranking method, would be kind of another deep group conversation where we would attribute a number of our own ranking. It's essentially the quantification of opinion, and that would allow, I think it would speak to the question of, schmoes are trying to make this decision kind of quickly. It could benefit in that way, that it would allow them to make that decision a little bit more quickly, but it would be inherently subjective if we created and then kind of solidified this tool. Because what you do is you assign, there's how Prometheus works is it's a very simple, this is the strength of the model. It's very simple in terms of comprehension of how it works, and the model itself is a very simple analysis, so you can tackle a huge amount of data. Obviously, we're not getting to that here, but it's what's called a pairwise comparison. So you have across the top with your columns, those are called criteria. So that's what we've been discussing, right? And then your rows are alternatives, and across each, boop, 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 just like that, the underlying math, I guess, it conducts a pairwise comparison. And we luckily have computers, love computers that they can do that for us, and they can make those, do the routine, those very rote tasks of the comparisons. And in order to do that, we need a number associated. And we would, as a group, to go through every single one of these and say, we agree, we think that the most, we could say maybe our scale is 1 to 10, and we could say the most pressing criteria, well, yeah, criteria is whatever, and we give that a 10. And that's the strength, but then also the weakness is we would have to go back as a group and make those decisions. And I don't know if we have necessarily the time to do that, but what we can do in this process is describe what we would do, that we don't have to look backwards and do some backcasting and actually do the ranking for the mitigation projects that have been submitted, but that we can describe what would need to be necessary, the steps to do it, and the strengths and benefits of doing so, and include that in the plan, send it to OEM. I'm definitely in favor of using Prometheus. I think it is clear, it's replicable. It demonstrates at every single step what decision was made and why. And you can change it. It's flexible. You can go back and re-rank if we have new information, or if there is kind of a change in statewide policy direction. Maybe we're focusing on a different sector. Like right now, we're focusing on housing. If we change, we can make those adjustments. Yeah, that's a little bit of insight into how the process.
So I have a question, Trisha, about this. I remember in some of Chris's previous examples with the risk assessment work group, there were negatives and positives in that
Yeah.
sheet. And so I was thinking, if you scroll back up to our list of criteria, I was thinking that we could put something like, for each one, we could score it a positive or a negative from some
Maybe with, I don't know if that would apply to these criteria, because the criteria that we were working with in the risk assessment is like, for example, demographic, maybe, well, let's do housing. Let's do like housing tenure, which is, do you rent or own? In some areas, it would be negative to rent because you don't have the same kind of certainty. You don't have access to the same like loan capabilities. I don't know. I'm a renter. I don't know what homeowners get to do. And so that would be a negative. But in some situations, being a homeowner is a negative because you have less flexibility to move if something happens. And if you combine certain conditions, like if you are a homeowner but you're very low income, that is a negative. And so that's where the positive and negative kind of associations came from. But in this example, Perhaps. I see your point here of, you know, maybe we could attribute if a proposal doesn't, or if a proposal does, that it's a positive or negative.
Or for example, look at number 22. For
Okay.
mitigation planning grants, at which stage is the jurisdictions or the tribes? You're at the very bottom of the screen now, yeah.
Oh,
Where
okay.
is the NHMP in its life cycle? So if it's never developed, do
That's a
we,
negative. Okay.
is it
Mhm.
a negative, or, you know, like
I
if
see.
they're
I see.
applying
Mhm.
for a planning grant, are we going to give it first to somebody who's never cared before? You could look at it negatively that way, or you could say, oh, they want to do one. Yeah, we want to cover everybody. So let's prioritize those. If it's expired, you know, it's like, do you want to penalize somebody for whatever their situation is? Or do you want to just,
Yeah. Yeah.
you know, or just give points, you know, like the
Yeah.
highest points you could get, here's 5 or something like that.
And
So,
that's the quantification of opinion, right? Because I would personally take like a planning positive approach and say, if we can get mitigation plans done anywhere, that's a yes. That if your plan has never been developed, if it's expired, if you want to do planning, uh, you're prioritized, and that you a jurisdiction wouldn't be penalized for not having a plan, or for having an expired plan.
mhm,
But I'm sure that others would probably have different opinions, or maybe could, right? That's just
mhm,
my opinion. And there's also probably room for subjective interpretation, like when the politics of some things, what if, you know, there was a jurisdiction where there were issues in the past, they had an expired plan, but they really didn't want to work with a certain agency, and so they go and try and find money elsewhere. Would they be prioritized? We don't know, right? And that's where it gets subjective. And the hope here with this process is that we can bring a little bit of transparency into the decision-making process and some efficiency.
The other way to do it, you know, being very simple-minded, would be
Yeah.
just giving 1 point for every criterion that somebody could
Yeah.
attach to their proposal, you know?
That's another question. Yeah, is weighting.
Mhm,
I would be on the same maybe understanding as you, that I would want to do equal weighting. I would want to unequally weight certain
mhm,
themes that you have in here.
mhm.
So I
So,
think, Marion, does it sound right? My kind of interpretation of this is that this is something where we'll write up the method of how we would do it, but this isn't something that we're applying and doing.
no, we
This
are.
is
We do have to prioritize these criteria.
oh, right. I mean, we will prioritize the criteria, but for a planning grant, we won't test it out. We'll prioritize our criteria, say this is what we're going to do, and then but we're not going to have to then apply this to a planning
Oh,
grant.
OEM will,
They could.
might, yeah.
Murph, you have your hand up.
Yeah, thank you. Would different areas then have different scoring, so to speak? If we went with a scorecard, so to speak, would a different region have a different score because its landscape is different than another one? Would there be pluses on one or another, or is that confusing?
No,
Well, I don't know if we have any criteria in here that speak
that are geographic.
directly to geography,
Um,
but all of the criteria in here are geographically bound, that they do speak
well,
to certain areas, but there's no like
the
there's no
criteria,
yeah, we don't specifically call out a geography.
no, we're not specifically calling out the geography, but delivering the 40% to delivering 40% to the disadvantaged communities, and the jurisdictions at the highest risk with the highest vulnerability, including socially vulnerable people, those will probably incorporate geography.
Okay.
think geographic distribution would be probably covered by that. Just because of the way it works out.
Thank you.
Yeah, so I'm just thinking like, Christina's suggestion about ranking the criteria with a poll and ranking the shared criteria separately from the unique categories, and then we'd have to integrate them. But that is something that we could use to potentially come up with the numbers that we use in Prometheus. Or not. Am I understanding that correctly?
Can you say that again? When we rank the criteria, we could
So-
potentially use those same numbers?
So Christina was suggesting that if we used this four-cornered thing, plus, we took all the ones that were common to all of them, put them in a shared category, and then we ranked them using a poll, then the numbers we would come up with from the poll could be plugged into Prometheus.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
I'm trying to figure out how to use everybody's great ideas here. And get us to some conclusion about how we might do this. It's obviously obviously we're not going to get to actually ranking them today. We may need to meet again to finish this up maybe in January, or give us some more time to think about it. One of the reserved meetings that we have on our schedule. Yeah, Murph, go ahead.
I like that idea. Put it that way. So you're getting a reaction here.
You like which idea?
The
Of
revisit.
Yeah, of just what you explained, of ranking it according to the Prometheus, the four-corner Prometheus, and then we could poll and
Yeah,
score.
because there's only actually, 1, 2, 3, 4, 6, 7, 8, 9, 9.
Don't use this
Yeah.
list. These lists here are 25 to 30 criteria that we have now.
Right.
Oh.
Okay. Murph, go ahead.
No, and that's what just exactly what you said, Marianne. Trying to simplify this, put this in the four corners that Christina's mentioned also, and use it such a way that we can pull these after I'm losing my thought.
Yeah, I think I hear you that so we would have the shared ones ranked by a poll. We'd have each of the 4 unique ones ranked by a poll. And then we would have to figure out a way to integrate that
Right.
to get them back to just 4, I think, or figure out a way to integrate them, and then use the numbers that we come out with after the polling and integration to plug into the Prometheus, I think. Or maybe the Prometheus might be the integration method. So we do the polling, we we polled, I think Christina suggested like 1 through 3, and it could even be, it could be bigger numbers. And then when we get those results, that's what we plug into Prometheus to, I have to think this through better. I'm not quite there. But I'm thinking that we could use the numbers that come out of those rankings somehow to plug into Prometheus and then let Prometheus rank them.
Yes.
Yeah, you certainly don't have to be wed to my idea. If it's easier to just have 4 lists and we rank all the criteria for the 4 lists each time, that's totally fine with me as well. I guess the thing I think I'm hearing is whatever poll you do send out, just make sure that you know how it's going to fit into Promethi and that you get the data that you need from us, right?
Right.
However that looks. I think we're all flexible enough. We can rank all of them. We can give them points, however that makes sense for you.
Okay. Okay. I'm feeling like we're getting to an ending point here today. Is there anything else that anyone wants to contribute? Yes, Reed.
Yeah, just one more thought on this. I was curious on your thoughts about if you have these, 25 to 30 more specific criteria, are you going to like rank all those at kind of the same level, or do these higher level categories, are those going to be assigned, sort of these broader weights? Because you could imagine something that has 6 sub criteria could have a bigger score if you just treated them all equally. And you might lose track of like the most important broad categories based on where the number of smaller categories is. So
I see. Yeah.
I don't have a good answer for how you should do that in a effective way, but I think it's worth thinking about up front.
Okay. So I think that's a great point. You're right. So I think where we are now is that we have to figure out how we're going to do this. Well, we need to finalize the list based on our conversation in the beginning of the meeting, the earlier part. Then we have to decide on a method, carry it out, and see where that lands us, and if we're happy with it. And so I'm thinking that this would be one more meeting in January to close this loop. Does that sound good to everyone? And between now and then, we'll get the methodology done, and if we send out a poll, we'll do that. We'll explain everything. Jason? Yeah.
If we have the follow-up meeting and the methodology is finalized, is there something in this project after that involves testing that methodology and running some test cases,
Well, I think
like a sample project or something like that?
yeah, we may be able to do that. Yeah, if we're using Prometheus, definitely. I think Trisha, jump in here and correct me if I'm wrong.
Of
But
using Prometheus in this
yeah,
instance to rank criteria and then testing it. I don't know if we would have anything to test. We would just have the result. The
well,
test.
go ahead. I mean, could we test it on a previous application, for example?
Yeah. Do we have time to do that? I don't know. Yeah, we could.
We'll see. Yeah, I mean, ideally, we should test it. We'll also end up, I think, getting OEM's input on this, which could change something. But because unfortunately, the folks at OEM who would be using this are not on this call. But yeah, I'm making a note of that. And we'll see how we can do that. I think somebody else brought that up earlier too. Okay. So we'll be back in touch. And thank you all for your time and for being here, for your good ideas and the good discussion.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Do we, real quick before we stop
Thanks.
the recording, do we have any members of the public? Marion, do we
Oh,
need to do that
I'm
for this
sorry, I
meeting and
forgot.
do any comment? I don't think that
I
we
think we do.
do.
No, I
Okay.
don't think we do. Okay, thank you.
Yeah, you're welcome. And did you started the recording, right, Marion?
No,
Okay, somebody did.
okay, well,
It says it's recording right now.
yeah,
Was it you in your when you made it, did you
it's
automatically
possible.
say
I don't
yes?
remember. I probably did. So we'll end and, did you move? Okay, we'll end and then we'll see
Well,
whose computer it ends up on.
I'm gonna save the chat. We don't have to end it. No, I'm gonna stay right here until we figure out what this is. So just hold on. Matt can just wait. Fine. Do we have any? How was that?
Matt
How
may
was
have
it, Joseph?
Matt may have heard what you just said because I'm in both meetings. I didn't.
Well,
Well,
he can just wait
Yeah,
because we need to
I
get this recording. So hold on. I logged in as you, Marion, and
oh,
I'm gonna look and see if I can. Okay, so options, you did automatically record to your local computer. So when we end, it will be on your computer.
okay. So
Good.
let's end and go to the what you
The
call
debrief.
it? Yeah.
Okay, sounds good.
Okay, bye.
All right, bye.